what's going on.
All right. Well, hello and welcome everybody to yet another episode work group meeting. It is not October 24th. It is November 17. Don't know how many times Leslie, Robin and I looked at this. Sorry, I saw you, Leslie. Robin and I looked at this, but for some reason I was focused on the left-hand side and not on the other. So we are not trying to throw you for a loop. It is indeed November 17th. Today, what we want to focus on is really two things. One, we want to pick up on last month's conversation where we had started identifying some more specifics for each of the recommendations we want to tackle as this work group. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's going to be the bulk of the first hour that we spend together. Then I am going to hand it over to the amazing Alex Perry, who is working tirelessly with us on trying to finalize the dual credit policy. Hopefully you got a chance to look at that when it was shared with you earlier today, but he's going to basically take over the second hour and get your feedback, our feedback on where it is now. So that's our plan for today. I hope you are willing to participate and share your thoughts, because today's really going to be a big interactive meeting. So apologize for whatever you have going after this, because we're going to use up your brain here. Do you want to move the slide for me, please? So just to reorient everybody, because we've all done other work since we met together last time, on this slide, you see all of our work group recommendations, and there is a reason for the color coding. So number 1 and number 2 are the priorities recommendations that we inherited from last year's group, and that is work that is underway and ongoing. We are going to touch base on the dual credit policy after today's, or at the second half of today's meeting, and the episode toolkit conversation we are going to pick up again in the new year. Our consultants with ESG are working hard on utilizing the feedback and information from last session, and also from some other stakeholders that they're meeting with. So there should be something for them to present with us. So then, if you recall, 2 meetings ago, I think it was, maybe it was even 3 meetings ago, we prioritized and we used the Menti poll to prioritize where we saw these fall. And the green ones, 3, 4, and 5, was really what was in top 1, 2, and 3 for us, right? And the reason I say that is because we did not include the revised dual credit policy and the episode toolkit on there, because that was already determined. And if you recall, 3, 4, and 5 were kind of like neck and neck. So as a group, we decided that's really where we need to focus our time and energy on. And then once we have sort of honed in on that, which is the plan for today, we're going to move forward sometime in the spring on 6, 7, 8, and 9. Before you change the slide though, Robin, the last thing I want to tell everybody is 3, 4, and 5 has turned into 3, 4, 5, and 6, because as we were planning for this meeting and talking, we really feel like advising and communications are 2 separate topics. So when we're going to go through and talk about this in our breakouts in a little bit, we're going to look at strategies for improving advising, and then we're going to look at strategies for improving communications. So we took facilitators, co-leads prerogative, and separated those out. So just as a reminder, we are focusing on what we can do to move the needle on this work at the state level, right? So much of this happens locally and with local partnerships that will happen at the local level, and we can't, influence that in the same way we can at the state level. So the 6 levers are policy and accountability, funding and incentives, communications, data research, convening and professional learning, and partnerships. Very cross functional, and a lot of things that we fit into what we talked about above. So what we want to do is are we going to break into breakouts, Robin?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. That was the plan, but since there's a few of us, I just wanted to double check. So Robin and I are going to divide and work with you all, and spend the next hour really honing in on these now 4 top priorities that the group has decided on, and then find out what are the top 3 recommendations for each. So we're going to take a deep dive on what does improving advising related to EPSOs actually look like, and what does that mean, and what are the top 3. We might have more, but we want to focus on the top 3. Is it effective communications? Robin and I were trying to figure out, like, what is it around communication that we need to do at the state level? And, that's part of the discussion that we're going to have. Is it improve communication? Is it, deliver effective communication? We stuck effective in there because we like it, but we want to test that with you all. And then incentivize teacher credentialing for EPSOs and ensure EPSO program quality and alignment. So the way this is going to work is that the folks in my group is going to tackle 2 of them first, and the other folks are going to tackle the other 2 first. And then after about half an hour, we're going to switch. But when we switch at that point, for the latter half an hour, we're going to work with what the other group has already done, right? So we kind of did this in a previous exercise similarly, but then we are not going to debrief. We're just going to share out the slides afterwards so that we can move into Alex's work. Does that make sense to everybody? Robin, did I miss anything?
I think you got it all.
Okay. And if somebody joins in late, will they just be wished into one of our breakout group rooms?
I'm hoping that since I'm the host, that I'll get a message that somebody has come into the room. That's what I'm hoping for.
And Alex seems to be saying
he's nodding that I should get that if I don't stay in the main room.
No, because that's tricky when you're facilitating a breakout and you're the host. So kudos to you for doing that, and I'm glad it's not me. So we will provide a little bit more direction when we're in each of the breakout groups, but for now, I guess, unless anybody needs a clarifying question or
good. Okay.
Well,
so I set the timer for 45 minutes, Harmony, so because we're at 1:10 right now, so it'll automatically bring us back at that time.
Well, and I think we have fewer people, so I think that's totally fine.
Be okay. All right. Well, I'll open all the rooms now. Okay. I'm going to
Just having some Zoom problems.
Did she just drop the call, or what happened?
Yeah, she dropped off.
Okay.
So I fingers crossed she is coming back.
Okay. Yeah. I can check on her. So we knew that this would be like a very tedious first hour of our meeting today. So I don't know if you all feel like you need to take a 2 or 3 minute stretch break. We are going to dive into the dual credit draft policy at 2. So do y'all need a little minute? Okay. So promise me you'll come back at 2. You got 3 minutes, okay?
Robin, I don't have a copy of the policy because Justin usually comes. Could you email me?
I sure will. I saw your message and I wasn't able to get it just because I've been pushing a lot of buttons. So I'll send it to you right now.
Oh, I know you've been a busy bee. So thank you.
Hi, everybody. Excited to talk to you a little bit about where things stand with the dual credit policy. And I'm going to walk through the PDF momentarily, but I want to dwell first of all on the dual credit attainment goal, because you will see that there is one in the draft, and I want to kind of walk you through the thinking behind the what we picked and why, and what went into that, where we are in that process and that decision making. So I'm going to share my screen because I put some slides together for doing this. And some reason I've been a huge fan of just like a very plain white PowerPoint the last couple of days. Don't ask me why. Probably because I've been doing this at the last minute. So just to kind of, so we're going to just kind of drill in on one section of the policy to start off with, which is the dual credit attainment goal. Now, you've seen a lot of the language that lives around this before in the, not last month's meeting, but the one before, when we presented this text and the text of the vision statements. Got a bunch of feedback from this group. I think we spent nearly the whole session looking at this. But there was a giant X in the, where it said by 2030, X% of Kentucky high school students should graduate high school having completed at least one dual credit course with a qualifying grade of C or higher. And we have selected 50% as the metric that we are looking to achieve by 2030. But it's important not to just take that on its face by itself as one sentence, but as a whole, right? Both the reason behind having the goal and the importance of the next section. As Kentucky increases rates of student success and dual credit, the state is working to ensure that the economic, demographic, and geographic makeup of students participating in dual credit matches the economic, demographic, and geographic makeup of Kentucky's high school population as a whole. And then the strategies that go alongside that. Achieving the 50% goal will be accomplished by expanding access and success among students with little or no current access to dual credit, focusing on providing Kentucky students with meaningful dual credit experiences, supporting student success in dual credit, strengthening partnerships between high schools and colleges, and engaging employer partners, and expanding access to early post-secondary opportunities as a whole. So where does 50% comes from? Well, if you look at growth over the last 5 years, we're currently, the latest data from 2021 has 40.7% of graduates passing dual credit with a C or higher at any point in their high school career, aka by the time a student reaches high school graduation, they've taken at least one dual credit course in which they have scored a passing grade. So 40% right now, up from 33% in 2017. We did see significant increase in participation overall between 17 and 21, as largely, I think, a result of the creation of the scholarship, which obviously led to a lot more opportunity for students to participate in dual credit and do it for free. Bit of a dip as a consequence of the pandemic, but we're at 40.7% today. So we're proposing to get up to 50. So that's basically a 1% increase every year between now and 2030. We decided rather than have like 2 decimal points, we would just pick whole numbers for this. So basically saying, let's say 2021 is effectively 41%. Then we're looking at adding a percentage point every year between now and 2050. And I can hear you asking why. Right? Like, why 50%? Why not 45%? Why not 55%? Why not 60? Why a percentage number at all? And I think there's 2 main reasons why we're interested in doing this and having a specific percentage goal associated with it. The first is that we have designed this to tie into the state's existing statewide post-secondary attainment goal, right? So all of you are familiar with 60 by 30, the state's post-secondary attainment goal that says that by 2030, 60% of Kentuckians should have a post-secondary degree of some description. And so we kind of came at this initially thinking about it from the perspective of, right, like how can dual credit help contribute towards meeting those goals? And obviously dual credit is a component of meeting those goals, right? Research tells us that students who have access to dual credit are more likely to access college and more likely to complete college, which means that we want to make sure that if students can be successful in dual credit, they are having access to those dual credit programs. and being given the opportunity to succeed in taking them. And so the dual credit attainment goal and the rate of growth that we have selected to hit 50 by 30 in this case, right? I don't think that's what we'll call it, but to hit 50% of dual credit attainment by 2030, that slightly exceeds the growth rate necessary for the state's overall post-secondary attainment goal. So if it's 60 by 30 right now, I'm trying to remember what the current year is, but basically what we did was looked at what would it take to get from, I think it's like 48% this year. If post-secondary attainment in Kentucky is 48% this year, and you're trying to get to 60, what's the growth rate necessary to do that? And then if you match that growth rate to dual credit, what does that look like? AKA, every year we're contributing an increase in dual credit student participation that is commensurate with the post-secondary credit attainment that we're supposed to be seeing on the other end, according to the 60 by 30 goal. This slightly exceeds it, because if you did just the growth rate, it was like 47.32%. And I don't know about you, I typically have difficulty remembering numbers with 2 decimal points in it. So we did ultimately round it up to 50 and adopt a slightly more aggressive growth rate in order to help contribute to those statewide goals. And the other big piece of this is closing gaps in representation, right? Which we know is a key priority that we ultimately want to achieve. And the only way to close gaps in representation in Kentucky dual credit, well, there are 2 options for closing gaps in representation for Kentucky dual credit, right? One of which we should want to do, the other of which I think is probably not the right way to go. And I think you'll agree with me, right? The first way to do it is by expanding the overall population of students who are participating in dual credit and focusing that expansion on the students who are underrepresented, right? If you can increase the number of students overall by increasing the number of students who are underrepresented, you will see a population expansion in terms of how many students are succeeding in dual credit, but you will then also see closing those representation gaps as a result. The other option is, rather than increasing the size of the population of students who are currently underrepresented, you decrease the size of the population of students who are overrepresented, aka you start taking away dual enrollment credit opportunities from students who have it today in order to address those representation gaps. That doesn't sound like the right strategy to me, which is why we focused on thinking about it from an expansionary mindset of we have a population of students who are in dual credit today. How do we grow that population in such a way as we are focusing on growing it from those students who are underrepresented? And if you look at, for those populations of students for whom we have data around dual credit attainment, that being rural, urban, low income as represented by free and reduced price lunch or paid lunch, gender and race, the average underrepresentation, so if you just look at the populations that are underrepresented, those being urban students, male students, free and reduced price lunch students, Native American or Native Hawaiian students, Black students and Hispanic students, and students who identify as 2 or more races, if you average that underrepresentation, it's about it says 6.2. It might be 6.8. Actually, I might have put the wrong number down. It's between 6 and 7% is the average underrepresentation across each of those student groups. Some a lot more. Black underrepresentation is 17%. Some less, but 6.2 between 6 and 7 is where the average comes out at in terms of what is the average underrepresentation of student groups who are underrepresented in Kentucky right now. And ultimately, we tried to go down a path of thinking about, well, is there a way of just quantifying exactly how many students are underrepresented from these student groups and then adding that all together and having that be the goal? There are challenges associated with doing that, which I won't get into, which meant that we didn't go in that direction and it's not really possible to do it. And that's why we ultimately decided, well, okay, well, let's look at what the average underrepresentation is, because if we can expand dual credit success by that average underrepresentation rate, and we focus it, again, going back to the strategies on expanding access and success among students with little or no current access to dual credit, we will significantly reduce and probably eliminate, in some cases, these equity gaps. We probably won't hit all of them, because it's really difficult to calculate what the level needs to be in order to hit all of them in that way. But we can feel very confident with a 50% by 30, with a 50% dual credit attainment goal by 2030, that we will be significantly reducing and eliminating gaps in representation that we see in the current populations of students who are underrepresented in dual credit, without taking anything away from students who have access right now. And so the attainment goal, basically, the strategies contribute to the attainment goal basically in the following ways, right? The top one's obviously the most obvious: expanding access and success among students with little or no current access to dual credit. If we meet the attainment goal through doing that, we will have reduced or eliminated many of those underrepresentation gaps in the state by 2030. That will be something to really kind of take a step back and celebrate at a high level. Focusing on providing Kentucky students with meaningful dual credit experiences. So I talked before about how, like, we don't want to take anything away from students in terms of coming in and saying, no, you can't get access because we need to expand access over here. But I think from some of these conversations, there has been a sense that, like, there are maybe some students who are taking more dual credit than they need to. And if we can encourage those students to be making better, more meaningful, intentional choices, and have them want to do that too, right? It's not about taking anything away from students. It's just about encouraging them to make better choices. We might actually see some of the participation in dual credit from other student groups fall slightly as a consequence of them making better, more valuable, more meaningful individual choices for them around dual credit participation. Supporting student success in dual credit, strengthening the partnerships between high schools, colleges, and engaging employer partners, and expanding access to early post-secondary opportunities as a whole. Both of those, all three of those, are really about just thinking about, as we're reaching this goal, how are we maximizing the value proposition of doing that, not just from the student perspective, but from the state and from the economic perspective as well. So that's the goal. And I'll kill the slides for a second, and then I'm just going to walk you through the policy real quick. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at this. If not, it's shorter than the old one, and so that should hopefully help you in getting through it. An introduction section, it's kind of similar to the introduction that's in the 2016 version, just updated for 2022, acknowledging that there was a 2016 version of the dual credit policy, which this will ultimately supplant, and some of the reasons for doing that. Kentucky's vision for dual credit, which again, these are the vision statements that we reviewed and commented on in the August meeting, and you hopefully will see that language has been updated to reflect your input that you provided in that meeting. The dual credit attainment goal, which I just talked you through. See, we're racing through this now. And then a set of definitions. I'm trying to think about, there are obviously different terms that are used in the state. What are those terms? What do those terms mean? And what do they basically mean in practice too, right? Like, there are statutory definitions for things, but then there's also sometimes a bit of a gap between how does the statute define a specific term and how is that term used in everyday parlance in Kentucky. And we've tried to kind of balance the two, and would be really interested in additional thoughts and comments on how to evolve and improve that. Course offerings, so thinking about, so many of these pieces cover it from, like, they're the same sort of chapter headings as there was in the existing dual credit policy. Basically, the MO for all of the rest of these categories was we really wanted to update it to reflect what law and regulation about Kentucky dual credit says today. Because there are now two pieces to this puzzle now. Before, pre-today, we just had the dual credit policy, and all of the sort of thoughts and perspectives on A, how dual credit must function in Kentucky, and B, how dual credit should function in Kentucky were kind of blended together in that original policy, right? There was lots within the policy that it didn't say, like, law didn't say it had to be that way, regulation didn't say it had to be that way. The group who developed that policy originally decided that there were a set of things they really wanted to see dual credit programs do within the state, all of which are best practices and should be happening, that were included in the policy that weren't necessarily backed up by what law or regulation required of the way that dual credit programs should function. And so for this version, given that we're now developing a toolkit, and the toolkit allows us to go into so much more detail around some of those best practices, right? Not just kind of laying out for programs, this is how it must be in one sentence. but saying this is how it should be, and then outlining the strategies to get you towards that and what kind of things to be thoughtful about in doing that. We have sort of taken a really hard look at this and said, what's most appropriate for the policy, aka outlining how things must be, versus outlining the things that should be, that nobody should be doing outside of this, but aren't must do from the perspective of the laws not telling you to function this way and regulations maybe not telling you to function this way either. And so we've kind of gone through that decision-making process and we're still kind of tweaking this, and there was some stuff that was in this yesterday that's now been taken out and is shipped over to the toolkit for inclusion there, because it's ultimately the best place to reflect this, because we can have, rather than just have it be an A clause that's one sentence, it's an idea we can include and build out in more detail and provide more supportive resources to dual credit programs to have them figure out the how, not just the what. So course offerings, student eligibility, which is basically just drawn now from the current regulations around student eligibility in the state, discussion about the transferability of credit and what's required around that. Dual credit teacher credentialing is a new one. We've included a specific section on dual credit teacher credentialing, and have also included within that what the SACS requirements are for dual credit teacher credentialing, because we know that's a question that dual credit programs frequently get from high schools, and we wanted to give you a place where you could just go grab that language in real time from one central place. And then a proposal for reviving the Dual Credit Advisory Council within the CEC, and sort of some of the structural pieces about what that will look like. There is a discussion on tuition and fees, but obviously talking about things like the dual credit scholarship and all of the components around that are probably best vested within the toolkit, where they can be continuously updated rather than this policy, which needs to go through a review and approval process every time there's a change associated with it. And then a stripped down version of the key roles and responsibilities. The old policy had a very lengthy list of that. We've kind of distilled this now down to what we think are the core pieces of what each of the roles and responsibilities of the key actors are. There is a supplementary document that we developed, which was sort of a dual credit ecosystem for Kentucky, that goes into much more detail about how each of the different entities within the system functions, that will probably publish concurrently with this as a separate piece. But within the policy itself, this is sort of the focus of what everybody's kind of roles and responsibilities are within this. And then that is that. So that's my little presentation on the policy itself. And Robin, Harmony, I'm not sure exactly how you had thought and planned to kind of handle the discussion, but would love to kind of hear thoughts, comments, reactions, questions about the revisions and the changes, about the goal, about any element of this that you're interested in talking about and providing feedback on. And I did include some questions which are in the agenda, and we'll walk through those. But I guess I'm curious at this stage, just for those kind of high level reflections, comments, thoughts, reactions.
Robin, I'm having technical difficulties, so I'll need you to.
Okay. I really just wanted to open up the floor for comments, thoughts, ideas. I think the questions that we sent earlier today about what do you feel like is not here that should be, what is here that shouldn't be, those kinds of questions. Would love to hear thoughts and responses to what we've got.
So did everybody, and I know that went out first thing this morning, and that's because we were making edits up until the last minute. Do people need more time to review before we can launch into that conversation? Head nods, head shakes. Where are you at, people?
Dean saying no.
Yeah. All right, well, good.
I guess the only question I have a clarifying question. In the space where it's talking about early colleges, it says only up to an associate's degree. The technical definition of an early college is an associate's degree or up to 2 years of credit. The way this is written currently, because only community colleges and some regional campuses can offer associate's degrees, only they would be able to work to create early colleges, if this is the language that stands. So I do think that that needs to be edited and corrected.
Yeah, we can do that for sure.
Great feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to drop the questions that were in the email earlier today, just if that helps to prompt some discussion.
What do you think about the goal? Do you like it? Do you hate it? You can hate it.
I think it's an appropriate goal. I said this early on when we started conversations around a statewide goal. I mean, I care far more about quality than quantity. So my mind is always there as we think about incentivizing the growth. I really want to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how we do that. But I think it's an appropriate and certainly attainable goal. And I definitely see the connections to the 60 by 30 and it pushing on that. So now my mind is already around metrics because I tend to think data a lot. And so, you know, Robin and I were actually on a call earlier with some data folks here internally at CPE, and we were actually talking some dual credit data. And I think there's going to be some things we have to work through moving forward around some data challenges across agencies and who the authoritative source of dual credit data is, and making sure we're all sharing the same data or finding a way to consolidate our data in a way that we can report out and feel comfortable about the accuracy of it. So I think there's a whole lot of stuff that we've got to unpack in the future reporting of it, but I do like the goal.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. And that's a great point, right? Which is that like the goal should never just live by itself and be a thing that's out there that like we're holding ourselves to just from the sense of what number were we last year and what number do we need to be next year, right? Like it is meant to signal the direction that we're planning to head in, which is designed to say it's not just about growing dual credit attainment, right? Because my sense is dual credit growth, if it tracks the way that the rest of the country is going, is probably going to continue to grow, whether there's a goal connected to it or not. Right. It's sort of just, it's like thinking about how do we direct and shape the movement of that growth? Mm-hmm. And so your point is so well taken, right? That the goal is one component of a broader strategy. It is not the strategy. Because if it was the strategy, right, like we could hit this goal by 2030 and have made no progress in reducing equity gaps, right? You could simply just add an extra, what would it end up being, right? Like 15% worth of white students who are in who are paid lunch students, and we would that would probably hit us at that 50%, and we would have done nothing to have made equity gaps smaller. In fact, we probably would have made them larger as a result. The one positive piece that as I was looking at the data, because KY Stats was kind enough to give us the 2017 through 2021, so I went through and looked at the underrepresentation each year for each of the student groups, is that largely those equity gaps are closing. We are seeing progress in terms of reductions in underrepresentation of students year by year. Black students has more or less remained static, but some of the other student groups like urban students, like free and reduced price lunch students, we have seen slow closing of the gaps. And I think this is just really sort of thinking about like, how do we continue that? How do we grow that? And how does this tie into A, the rest of the policy, B, the toolkit, C, the rest of the work of this group, right? Like all of the conversations we just had in the last hour are how you reach a 50% by 2030 goal and do it in the way you want to by growing amongst underrepresented student populations. And so for me, it's like, it's just, it is one holistic whole, which is saying the same thing twice. Sorry, it's been a long week. It's one whole that we are like, you know, sort of trying to move together everything at the same time on.
there's some reason why on the very bottom of the policy under secondary schools, is there some reason why determine how dual credit will be awarded transcripted at the high school is in italics? Or is it a different script or font?
I think that might just be a consequence of us having worked to make edits very, very quickly, and there will need to be a format scrub at the end.
Well, and I think on a couple of these places, Jenny, there are, like, if they're hyphenated or if you see slash marks, we're like, let's talk about what's the right word, or, you know, there are several spots throughout the draft where we're looking for that. Jenny, I was just thinking about something you said several meetings ago that's just stuck with me about how when dual credit first was rolled out in Kentucky, it was great for students, but it was kind of messy on the admin side, on the higher ed side, and for high schools. And so I'm just really wondering about this, the last question here that Alex had written for us about what elements of this policy draft should be built out or explained further in the accompanying toolkit. Like, I think it's really important for our group to zoom in on where some of those pain points are and try to provide some resources and support around those, so that we can move forward, you know, in a way that's not painful.
Well, so that does get back to the transcripted. I just wondered, was there a discussion about whether or not KDE would provide any guidelines about how dual credit courses should be transcripted? Because that's one of the things the post-secondary struggle with, is that, and obviously we can't control what's coming in from, you know, from private schools and from schools across the nation, but even within the public high schools in Kentucky, we see dual credit appear on high school, on college, on high school transcripts in very different ways. And was there a discussion about that? Particularly as we do more test optional admissions, seeing some type of consistency really does benefit the students.
Jenny, there is supposed to be a standard way that it is supposed to be on your transcript. It's already been prescribed on how it, because, and so.
Wasn't that prescribed by KDE on how it was supposed to be?
Yeah, I think, yeah, it was a conjunction between Kia and KDE of how it was, because that's how, like, they pull in for dual credit scholarship purposes as well. Right. So there is a prescription for that already. So if school districts are not doing it, they're just not doing it.
It's gotten a lot better, but it just made me think about it when I saw that determine how it will be transcripted was on the secondary school responsibility and not a KDE responsibility. Because the minute you make it a secondary school responsibility, it leaves the door open for that to then all of a sudden start to vary.
Well, the thing is within Infinite Campus, it is up to the school and the district to build those courses and not KDE. So they give you the guidelines of how you're supposed to do it. And then it's up to the district to do it.
And Jenny, I think you'll see under KDE's responsibility, that first bullet does speak a little bit to the data standards for the Infinite Campus work that has to be done.
Oh, okay. I see
that. So I think we can imply that it's going to be part of that and the future work around data standards, but you're right. I mean, your point's well taken, but at the same time, as Trinity said, that it's really on the districts and the schools to input it accurately, and that therefore it gets transcripted in the way that they.
I think the other one caught my attention because it's the last thing and because it's in italics. And then the other thing is, and I'm not sure, I don't have an answer to how you would put this, but you know, twice within the policy, they talk about parents being aware of what the tuition is. But there is, you know, we've talked time and time again about parents and students knowing better how a course is going to transfer to a 4-year institution or a 2-year institution. And there doesn't seem to be anything in the policy about that. Like, advising is different than just this course. If you go to this school is going to be this, right? That's not getting into how it's going to apply toward degree programs, which is an advising perspective.
Right.
Just like we're required to keep with, you know, with CPE, all of our AP policies, right? So the student knows that at the University of Louisville, in order to get, you know, psychology 201 credit, you have to get a 4 or 5 on the AP exam. And if you just get a 3, you're only going to get elective social behavioral credit.
Yeah.
But I don't see anything, and I don't know if you all tried, that gets a little messy, but I don't know if
Right.
y'all talked about that.
We did, in the sense that, like, and this is sort of where it comes down to this thing we have sort of struggled with a bit in this whole process, which is how much through the policy versus through the toolkit should we be talking about things like this, right? Like, related to the way that high schools transcript college credit. My understanding of having reviewed the laws connected to dual credit and the regulations is that there is nothing that kind of says that there must be consistency across the individual programs to do that. And so we've sort of been batting back and forth this kind of philosophical issue of, like, what is the role of the policy in terms of moving into spaces that law or regulation has not provided clear direction about what the outcome should be? Because it feels to me a little bit like the old policy tried to do some of that, but didn't ultimately end up leading to a significant degree of change within how programs ultimately functioned, or whether what the policy was telling people to do actually applied within the individual program contexts. And so is the best place to vest that within the policy, where there's a concern around someone saying, yeah, but the law doesn't tell me I have to do that, so I'm not going to do it, right? Like, versus vesting something like that within the toolkit or other resources, which are like, this, if you want to do this the best way possible, this is how you should be doing this. And we're strongly encouraging everybody to adopt this kind of, sort of same approach to how to apply this across every school district. And then I think maybe having a broader conversation about, well, if that is something that's ultimately a big concern to the dual credit stakeholder community as a whole, is that something that we want to pursue legislative or regulatory change around in order to actually create that change, versus sort of doing, like, the policy's kind of role as a legally enforceable document around what it says is really gray, right? In terms of it. And so that's sort of the challenge I think we've been batting back and forth. So we have been having a lot of those conversations, and we keep walking down paths of wanting to include stuff like that, and then kind of pulling ourselves back a bit and saying, well, actually, are we now just getting into saying how we want things to be versus how the laws and the regulations say things must be? And therefore, does that mean that's better vested in the toolkit rather than in the policy itself? But it's a great point, Jenny, right? And like, if you have a different opinion on that, like, hit us with it, because it's definitely one we've really struggled with in our internal conversations.
Well, I think there's a difference between telling people how those things will work and just providing, and then like just like you say, provide information about tuition.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think how, what it would be if there was just something under post-secondary institutions that said, provide information about transferability of your dual credit courses to, so all you're doing is saying you need to, you have a responsibility to put it out there and make it easy to find, right?
Yeah. I think, look under
CPE, it talks about establish, review, and revise, which sets a criteria for dual credit admission and transferability of courses.
Yep.
I'm just getting at that conversation we keep going back to about how difficult it is for families to find that information, and for high school counselors to find that information.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, let's we'll keep thinking about that one and see. And as you review the rest of the draft, if there are other places where you're like, hey, this is the right place to put something in, and maybe here's what to say, by all means, shoot us an email and we'll definitely, work on including it. Same for everybody. If you have specific language edits that you would like to see to what you're looking at, like, this is a good time to send them to us, and we're very open to people's thoughts and ideas about potential changes or amendments or additions to what's here already. We've worked a lot on this draft, but it's been sort of an internal process of a few people, and that's why it's great to kind of expand that out and start to get some additional viewpoints on it.
Alex, Robin, remind me what
I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I did like that it said to normalize the experience of dual credit in the high school experience. I think that's really important language, and I thank you guys for including that. I think there was a portion that's under what's the ideal dual credit experience for students.
Yeah.
And the part it says aligned to in-demand careers. For some reason, that really makes me prickle up a little bit. It just makes me prickle up just a little bit. I mean, because to me that reeks of tracking students and placing students in the careers that we feel like are best for them versus honoring the unique experiences and talents and gifts that students have. So I would prefer to see language that says a high quality that honors the unique career paths of the unique career experiences that students desire, versus it being, we need lots of nurses, so we're going to push all these kids into these nursing programs, regardless of if it's aligned to their skills, talents, or what they need to do. And I had a question. The tuition and fees part seemed really ambiguous to me. I guess I'm just wanting to know. It seems really thin and ambiguous to me. So I'm just wondering about reasons for that.
Yes, that's for a very specific reason. We had a far more built out tuition and fees section in which we'd included information about the dual credit scholarship and link outs to the various different places where you could find information on like how much was the scholarship and what did it cover and who was it provided for. But we were reminded that given that this is a CPE policy and that Kia has jurisdiction over the dual credit scholarship, that it probably was not appropriate for us within CPE documents to include, within a policy document like this, to include a lot of that kind of information. And so I think the thinking behind that is then to transfer a lot of what we had put within the policy around the scholarship into the toolkit and include a more robust discussion in the toolkit around tuition and fees and those other issues as well. I think there's a bureaucratic issue that behind that one, even though in our conception of it, we would obviously want to include much more information about that, but we have received pushback on that from a procedural standpoint. And Robin, if I have misidentified that, please.
Could there be a marker there that just says, please refer to the toolkit for further information on tuition, just so that people at least know where to go?
Yes.
To find more detailed information about that.
Yeah, I think we haven't kind of fully figured out how the two documents will crosswalk and align, but I definitely think there will be, whether it's like a note or a side box that like says there's a lot more information about dual credit that's not in the policy and about how things should function, and this is a place to go looking for it. That's definitely something I think we really do want to build in, so that if you're on one document, you can get to the other one and vice versa.
Yeah, that's a really good comment, and I think that would apply to a lot of the content that's in the policy. Thank you for that.
We received some written feedback from Regina, who was not able to attend the meeting. So specific to what elements of the policy should be built out. So forgive me for reading, but she says access to a personalized plan for dual credit that includes support services provided by high schools and college partners. As a high school counselor who works with dual credit students, they really do need individualized supports. It would be ideal to be able to provide personalized student support services for something that is as important as post-secondary plans. We are stretched very thin and the expectations are very high. How can we ensure that students have access to high quality counseling and advising on dual credit in their college and career goals? So again, probably more in the toolkit area than the other, but just wanted to share that. And then in terms of additional important ideas or concept, again, I think it fits in very well with it's unfortunate Regina couldn't be in the meeting because this is what my breakout talked about, but she says, I wonder how we can better communicate and connect with all parents about the benefits of dual credit, especially those families who are low income English language learners, minorities who have students who have disabilities, will be first generation college students. We have many families participating in dual credit, but I still hear from families who say they did not know about the opportunities. I think these populations also need to understand the opportunities associated with dual credit scholarships, work-ready scholarship, and transferability of courses among post-secondary opportunities. So reinforcing some of what Jenny said. We have info nights, send out emails, post on social media, but we're still missing folks. And she loves the attainment goal. I can forward you the email, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Harmony. I appreciate that. Additional thoughts or comments or reactions, things you like, things you don't like, things you wish you saw more of, things this makes you think, oh, we need to make sure that the toolkit talks about X in more detail than we have here in the policy.
Thought you're going to say things that make you go,
I'm not quite that twee. I'm very nearly that twee, but not quite.
I think my only, and I'm going to say this is is we talk a lot in this document, talks a lot about supports for the students. However, this document is all built upon the assumption that higher ed institutions are okay with continuing to offer dual credit, and meeting that goal is really going to depend upon higher ed's ability to follow through and to be able to commit to and allot resources to this effort. And something that, I mean, I just did a really big data dive, and something that's been happening at our institution is that students are coming in with such high rates of credit that it's really compromising our undergrad programs. And so in light of those kind of things going on, what kind of things in these policies are helping to support colleges that are wanting to participate in this thing that's really good for students, but that also can really unhinge the undergraduate student experience in their ability to operate financially and faculty wise on their campuses. And I don't see anybody as much. I'm students first. I'm a student success person.
Yeah.
But in thinking about it logistically, we won't see those results if we're so aggressive, or if we're not providing proper supports for colleges and universities to be able to help reach that goal.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, it's definitely something that makes us go too, right? From the perspective of, like, one of the things that I have been thinking about in this space, and it's the talking about, like, under the strategies of the goal, ensuring that students are having meaningful dual credit experiences is kind of designed to, like, start walking down a path of articulating this. But I think there's a much bigger conversation that lives behind the idea that you were kind of talking about, is this sort of concept that, right, like, dual credit is a tool to help students achieve something, right? And I think our sense is that well, actually, let me take a different state example of another state that we're working with, because it's more stark there, and the same might be true for Kentucky, and draw from this what you will, but it's easier for me to talk about from the perspective of nobody here is from Minnesota, so I can say whatever I want to about them. Right, like, so we've been doing some work in Minnesota, and they have state funding for dual enrollment, which makes it free for students. In fact, there's even more free. It's not just like a scholarship capped amount. Students can take as much as they want to. There's a formula for how it's paid for. They basically take the money from the school districts, give it to the college. And as a result, that's led to a significant, that policy's been around since the 80s, and there's just a lot of dual credit in Minnesota. And one of the key kind of conclusions that we have come to is that, yes, there are lots of students taking dual credit, but, like, did those students need to take as much dual credit as they did in order to get the benefits of post-secondary access or post-secondary success? Lots of them are taking just like a grab bag of credits that, like, they're not really kind of, those students have been told to take as much dual credit as possible, right? And so they're just taking and taking and taking and taking and taking. And so they're transferring large numbers of credits, but maybe only a handful of those credits are actually helping to progress that student on the pathway towards whatever their post-high school goals are. And so is there a way where we are seeing students taking more and more and more credits, but, like, there is that important question around like, well, from the student's perspective, right, it's been communicated to them to take as many college courses as possible. But was that actually what the student wanted to do? Was that actually what the student, right, like, you know, given an array of other options of things they could also be doing in high school, was taking that much dual credit ultimately the right thing to do, right? Like, I think that conversation around advising and communication and making sure that students really understand the value proposition behind dual credit is potentially how you start to unpick that. Because I think there are lots of students for who got that messaging from their high school. More dual credit is better under all circumstances. Just go pick as many courses you want to, right? And just like commit yourself to doing it. Where a slightly more intentional and tailored approach to what is it your post-high school goals are? How does dual credit tie into that? What kind of courses will help you kind of figure out what your goals are, move you along the path towards whatever that goal is, right? As broadly or as specifically defined as the student has done so. And you, like, I think there's a world in which there are many students right now who could take less dual credit than they do and lose nothing in terms of what it means to their onward post-secondary access, what it means to their onward post-secondary success, and what it means for their options and abilities once they get into college, and like how we think about the role that dual credit plays within students' overall educational journeys is so critical to that. Now, that's a huge conversation, and it's one that requires culture change and system change and all of that, but one that is also making us go, So I kind of just spent a long time saying I agree with you, and I don't really have a great answer to it. But that's something of my reflections on that. I'd be curious how you'd respond to that.
I do think that that's a part of the it's a part of the overall, and I don't know if there is an advising problem here altogether. Nobody wants students carrying in empty credit. That's an issue of advising. But the real issue is that what I think is what has came down is that universities and colleges have been given basically a unfunded mandate to operate dual credit in the state. We've been given an unfunded mandate. So now colleges and universities have to create staffing. They have to pay faculty salaries. They have to pay for advising. They have to pay for travel for people to go out to schools. All of these things on a tuition rate that's based upon one of the lowest in the state. And so to make that kind of funding model work is very, very tricky. And I think with the, you talked about earlier, the influx of students taking dual credit, that's being felt very deeply on these campuses, especially in colleges of arts and sciences, where the majority of their faculty and the majority of both their faculty and their programs are built upon offering general ed courses. And so so the question is, there's got to be some way to find a balance in between this, right, and make it work a little bit better for colleges and universities, so that there's still the incentive to provide this very beneficial program of dual credit to students, because I believe in dual credit, and I think it is a really great equalizer, especially when we're talking about low income, first gen, and underrepresented minority kids. But it's not going to continue to be that way if it's threatening the financial models of our.
I want to support what Naomi said. If some of you all that have been in this group a little bit longer remember when we did those focus groups this summer, I did a focus group with faculty members, primarily from our College of Arts and Sciences, and this topic came up. It's an unintended consequence. And that is the financial hit that this has had to College of Arts and Sciences, particularly like English and math departments, where there are large volumes of students coming in, and then those students are no longer taking those courses on our campuses. And as most of us have pivoted to these different budget models, right? Departments like English are particularly being hit hard. And I think what Naomi was trying to say is there's nothing in the policy that really gets at or speaks to or addresses, that issue, and I were going to refer to it as an unintended consequence.
I appreciate that. And Robin knows this because she was at a presentation I did yesterday with a bunch of state policy people from a bunch of states. It's like I think there is this key question where do we stop, right? Because we're currently barreling forward with more and more dual credit, and like it's no wonder that my example was there's dual credit is a train moving 200 miles down an hour down the track, right? And post-secondary faculty are currently standing on that track 50 miles down the line, right? And that question of where does dual credit stop, well, like if you are standing on that track and you don't know the answer of when the train is going to stop, aka it's going to be at some point in front of you, well, then, like any person, you were concerned that train is going to run you over, right? And that you were going to be a victim of that train. And like there is this world in which there has just been this expansion of dual credit and the amount of course taking that students are taking, where you plot those graphs out and you're looking at eliminating 1, maybe even 2 years of higher education for most, if not all, students. And that is a fundamental change to post-secondary education that we shouldn't sleepwalk into, right? Like when we shouldn't, like if we're going to make that change, it needs to be really intentional. It needs to be one where we set that as our intention and say, we're trying to create the UK system of higher education, right? Where it's 3-year post-secondary experiences that begin with discipline-specific coursework. But like, I don't know that anybody's coming into this. I mean, even I, the British person, product of the UK system of higher education, is coming to the table and saying that is the US higher education system that we want to create, right? And so I think this kind of ties in a little bit to sort of the vision conversation. And I think the vision as articulated in the policy doesn't go as far as we might want to at this stage, and sort of articulating where does dual credit stop within the state of Kentucky. But I really do think that's a critical conversation for this group going forward, is like, is we eventually need to identify what is the purpose of this for students, not just in the sort of like, we are looking to improve access and we are looking to improve success, but I think thinking even on a more granular level around, from a state perspective, what, right, and it's gonna be student by student, and there's gonna be variability in this, but it is sort of that question, right? What is the ideal dual credit experience for students? Right now it's articulated at a really high level, but I think as we get more comfortable with this and we figure out what's going on, like we can become more and more specific around what that looks like and what our expectations are, and at what point should dual credit end and actual higher education begin for students, and all of those pieces. So yeah, I think this is a really important conversation to continue to have, and Kentucky's not the only one in the position of having this conversation right now. I think this is the big conversation for dual credit over the remainder of this next decade, as you will see in a forthcoming paper published in April of 2023 by me, which I'm starting to write.
So I'm going to throw something in, but also higher education needs to look at it as an opportunity. Like I just dropped in. So my daughter, she graduated with 30 some hours. So she gets to knock a year off college. Now, keep in mind, she graduated second in her class, 4.6 GPA. She was fully capable of doing it. She knew she was going to get a master's. So I think we look at that as less time in college underneath the undergrad, but more opportunities for kids to pursue even more advanced degrees, masters and doctorates, which is what we need to bump up, our economy and things in the state. So instead of looking at it as, well, we have condensed time, well, I think a lot of kids now aren't just looking at shortening their college by year from dual credits. They're looking at, oh, now I'll still go to college for 4 years, but I'm going to get masters now.
And I think that's what we've seen. We've seen people get master's degrees. We've seen people graduate with multiple majors, with minors, with certificates and things of that nature. So it's not so much in my mind about, the length to time to degree. It's about that financial hit on certain, that it is targeting and hitting certain departments more than others. And again, I go back to English and math.
Yeah.
I do agree with that, Jenny. I think my gut tells me, I put a comment in the chat about really I've been wanting to see data on the breakdown of dual credit and where it's offered and how, virtually, off campus, on campus, by who, and whether that has any kind of change in the bottom dollar or fiscal impact to the institution. But I agree with you. I think gen ed is where we're going to see less revenue, right, than the CTE side of dual credit, where a lot of times those high school instructors are certified as adjuncts. It is being offered in the high school facility or the tech center with their resources, their supplies, their everything. And so I would love to see more of that in Harmony. I didn't know KCTCS had looked into that. So if you all have like anything that you're willing to share there, I would love to see that, just to kind of explore what that looks like. I'm also wondering too, I know, Alex, in the policy, we talk about like in the tuition and fees section, having to provide written information about those tuition and fees. But one of the things that I've tried to grapple with the last several years is the variability of the fee structures across the institutions. And I don't know if it's the role of this policy to try to mitigate that, but having worked on the secondary side for the last 18 years, I can tell you there is a level of frustration in that variability fee structure. So I don't know if there's any continuity or consistency that could be created through this policy around that, or caps, ceilings. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing that out there for conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, Leslie. We'll think about it. I think it comes down to that's another one that lives in that sort of philosophical gray area of like, there's nothing in law or regulation that says that has to happen. So how far could the policy go in terms of saying that in a way that would actually encourage uptake of it and change it a positive way? But again, right, like maybe that's a discussion for the toolkit too, right? Which is, we need to be creating more consistency, and here are ways to think about doing it and what that looks like. And that one might be a little we'll keep thinking about that one, because it is a great point.
Well, somehow 2 hours have gone by. Thank you, everybody, for great discussion. We are like-minded on this, and it's really good to just be able to have good, honest conversations about the struggles and the opportunities, etc. So we will take the information from the breakouts and figure out how to build on those, since not everybody was on the call today, and we didn't get to switch the groups as we had wanted, but we can adjust and be great. And Alex and the rest of us who are working on the policy toolkit will keep on refining it and take it out until it's where we are comfortable with it, but understanding it's not going to be the silver bullet and end all be all. So we do not meet again in December, because the CEC meets in December. So we'll provide them with an update on what's happened since they met 2 months ago, but be on the lookout for information for our meeting in January, when we will revisit the toolkit and possibly our priorities, but to be determined. And then there's the reminder that there's a Student Success Summit that the CPE is doing at the end of February, and I think in a week or two you'll be able to register for that. And thank you to everybody, and wishing you a happy Thanksgiving and Christmas, since we won't see you.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.